In our last lecture, we have seen an Angular application and its architecture in general. We have also learned how to program using TypeScript. We have seen the structure in the module and the component part. In today's lecture, we will see an overall of all the concepts which an Angular has, and then we will discuss few concepts in detail. So let's start. Angular has many concepts in it. The main concepts, those concepts are decorators, modules, components, templating, data binding, routing, directives, pipes, dependency injections, services, and some built-in services, observables, promises, animations, designing using Angular materials, Bootstrap, and Flex. So Angular has a lot of concepts that needs to be learned. Decorator, we have seen that in our last example, modules and components, we have gone through it. We will discuss today in detail. Same templating, an HTML template that will be generated against every component. That is also the part of basically templating is the part of component. Then data binding, how we can bind data from one way to another point, like from model to view and view to model. These are data bindings. Then the routing, how we can internally read out our components, how we can display our components one over another, because it is a SPA, single page application. Then there are some specific directives which are used to display some enhancements in your HTML. You can use loops, you can use other programming construct using these directives. Then we have pipes, the concept of pipes in our Angular application. Then there is a strong concept of dependency injection, in which we can inject one class into another class, and we can call all the functions of that class into another class. So dependency injection is there. Then the services in last lecture I have explained a little that it is basically a shared source that needs to be called from all the components. So all those functionalities which needs to be at shared point, it is normally written in services. Moreover, services are used to take information, to get information from third party REST APIs or our REST API. So services are also very important part. Then there is a new concept of observables, which is based on reactive programming. We will go through this concept of reactive programming and how we will use observables to get the data into our components through services. Then the promises, you have seen some of the promises in our server side code also. So we will see how we can use these promises in Angular also. Then there is a concept of animation. I will just go through it. I will not focus on these animations because it is a vast field to learn. So you can do a number of animations in Angular. It can be a simple just like can be fading, zoom in, zoom out, slides in, etc. These are all the animation that can be applied to any component in Angular. Same, you can design your UI using Angular material. It is a designing library just like Bootstrap. Either you can use Bootstrap or you can use Angular material. And same for the CSS, you can use Flex. Flex is a library which is basically meant for CSS functionalities. So these are the main concept that we will learn throughout this Angular part. So let's start. In today's lecture, what we will see, we will cover module in depth. Then we will see the component, how template is used. Then we will see the lifecycle hook of a component. Then we will see different type of decorators, either it is a class level decorator, property level decorator, method level decorators, or parameter level decorator. Then we will see data binding in shape of interpolation, or one-way data binding, or a two-way data binding. we will also see a property binding, and also we will also see an event binding. So all the binding activities will be learned in this part. And last is the routing part. We will see how we can implement routing in our Angular application. We will see how to add Bootstrap also today. So these are the major concepts which we will study. First of all, I will go through all the concepts. Then we will, in the second part of my video, I will implement these concepts using Angular application, which we have created in our last class, last lecture. So let's start. Module, in our last lecture I explained it is a container. An Angular app module defines an application. It is a container that group together blocks of functionality that belongs together, like components, directives, and services, and so on. So a set of similar functionalities are put into a container, that is basically our Angular module. Components also belongs to the module. Every component needs to be part of some module. This is an example. In it Angular is a simple class. A module is a simple class, just in like hello world app module. This is a class with empty information, but you provide this information using a decorator. We import this ng module from Angular/core. The first thing what we will do is to import ng module from Angular core, and then we need browser module for running the application on a browser. So in our this decorator, what we are explaining, the imports, the module which needs to be run uh, using this module. So these are the modules which are required to be available before running this module. Same, we can define the declarations, the components that are the part of this module. We will write all the components that are the part of this module. Then we will explain that these components need to be bootstraps, and same we can provide the providers, which is basically used for services and directives, etc. So module is actually a container. It does not do any specific functionality. It just provide a basic information about the components, about the services, about the directives that are required, and the third-party libraries that are required to run that part of the code. So these are all the part of the that decorator. The second concept is our component. Components are basically the basic building block of our application. A component can be a complete view or a part of view. Like in a page, if we have a header can be a component. If we have a footer, footer can be an independent component. Same, the information which is being displayed in between is also a component. And these three components can be a part of a parent component that is displaying the complete UI in front of you. So this is the way out to define the components. Define the behavior of a portion of the screen that combines elements with logic. They are typically made up of their own HTML template, CSS, and TypeScript code. That has I have explained that thing to you in last lecture, that every component have 4 files. The first thing is the template file, second is the CSS file, third is the TypeScript file, and fourth is the unit testing file. So every component is assigned to some specific module, and by default there is a parent module that is called app.module.ts, and parent component, that is our app.component.ts, is always assigned to app.module.ts by default. We have created one component. To create the component, there is a simple mechanism. We have to write the command ng gc and the component name. G is for the generate, and C is for the component, and then the component name. It will create a complete component as a it will create a new class that is basically a child component which implements on init class. So in which we have a constructor and a method called ngOnInit. We will see what is ngOnInit on next slide. ngOnInit is called by default when that class is executed. So we will see what a component look like. A component look like this thing. We have injector, sorry, decorator for the class, and then we will define the class, the whole class. We can define the constructor, we can define the functions, we can define the variables, we can define ngOnInit in it, and so on. So a class contains basically a number of things. So this is basically decorator for the class. It contains the selector template for the class with which we can call this component in other components. So this is an example again. You have imported component from Angular core. Then a component decorator contains selector property, which is basically the name of the component with which we will call this component into other components. Then the template, we have a template or template URL. I will explain it in next slide. That template, we can write HTML directly into this line, or we can provide a template URL and HTML file which will be displaying the output of this component also. So this is both things are possible. And last is the class. In this class we can write here the constructor and other methods, whatever we need to write. The template is actually HTML, which we can write any type of HTML in it. Almost all HTML syntax is valid template syntax. Only the script part is not available. We cannot write the script part into our HTML. Script has to be written in our TS file, and all the other functionalities can be done in our HTML part. Just like this, these are the data binding. I will explain it, this data binding. We can write a template URL, or we can write directly template. It's up to us to write directly inline HTML. We need actually the template word in the, just like this template, and we can write all the HTML here. To write a multi-line HTML, we need a backtick. You may know that the backtick is the new way out with which we can write multiple line HTML. If we don't want to write our HTML into our TS code, then better is to write the template URL instead of template. So we will write here we will write template URL and provide the file name .html, which will be executed against this component. Then there are lifecycle hooks. Every component have a life. It starts, it creates itself. Angular creates the component, then it renders its view into the screen, then create the render to its children, and it provide the data binding facility. It provides basically any property update, or just like a value update, and finally every component will be destroyed at the end. So this is actually the life cycle, and Angular provides you a facility to hook in between different time stamps of that Angular component. So those hooks or those functions that can that facilitate you to write some code in between those processes is called lifecycle hooks. So let's see what are the lifecycle hooks that are available with us. There are a number of lifecycle hooks that are available, like on change. After creating the constructor of the class, if you write something into the constructor, that means it will be initialized whenever the component is initialized. After initializing the constructor, the first function which it calls is ngOnChange, and it responds Angular set data bound input properties and etc. And after that automatically ngOnInit will be called. that initialize the directives components after Angular first display the data bound properties and sets the directives components input properties. So by default after constructor this function will be called. If you want to do something when your page is, yeah, your view is being rendered, you can write here or in this ng on init, and whenever it will be loaded or it will be re-rendered, ng on init will be called and it will load the things according to your function. So you can write the function in ng on init also, and you can write you can hook ng on change also. After that there are multiple functions that ng do check, ng after content init, ng after content checked, ng after view init, ng after view checked, and ng on destroy. So these are all the lifecycle hook functions. You can write any type of code if you want to do on a certain timestamp or timeline of a component lifecycle. So you can call any of these functions. These are all the built-in functions, and in these functions you can write your own functions, or you can write the functionalities whatever you want to perform. Like I'm giving an example. I want that whenever a component is loaded, it counts a length of an array and display that length of that array. I will write that code into my ng on init function. So it will actually calculate the length of that array, and it will display it on screen that the array is of this length. So this is basically a functionality that is performed at the loading time of the component. So this is the purpose of these lifecycle hooks. Then the concept of decorators. We have seen a class level decorator. There are 4 level of decorators: class level decorators, properties level, method level, and parameter level. And I have explained to you that it is just like annotation in Java. It provides an extra functionality of metadata about the class. So we have seen this class level decorator at very minute level. Basically there are two major components, there are two major class level decorators. Those are called @component and @ng module. @ng component is used with any component class, and @ng module is used with the module type of class. They allow us to tell Angular that a particular class is a component or a module. The decorator allows us to define this intent without having to actually put any code inside the class. So we haven't write anything in the class, but we told the Angular that these components, these are the components, these are the modules. So we have already differentiated between these classes using the decorators. No code is needed within the class to tell Angular that it is a component or a module. All we need to do is to decorate it with the relevant decorator. Then our second level of decorator is at the property level. We can tell Angular that this property is actually binded somewhere. So we have the input and output type of decorator that can be assigned with any property. I'm just giving you an example here, that this example property string, we are telling the Angular that it is @input. It means the Angular understand that this property value will come whenever this component will be called. It will be provided whenever this component will be loaded. So see this example component, which is our class. We are calling this component and we are passing this property through this component. So whenever this example component will be called, we are passing the example property variable value, example property with the example data, and this will be provided to this class whenever this component will be called. So this is the way out with which we say that the input value of this variable will be assigned at the time of calling this variable, this class. So this is the way out with which we can provide a property level decorator. Same, we can provide a method level decorators, which tells a specific method when it will be called. Like on host click, we @host listener tells that it will be called at click on event array. Whenever an event on an event array there is a click, against that click this method will be called. So this is the way out with which we can provide a method level decorator. So above the above our function we define the decorator, which tells that against which function it will be called. So this is one way to call a function. We have other way through data binding, we will see it also. And the fourth and last way out is the parameter decorator. Parameter decorator tells the Angular that this parameter will be injected from some other way, some other place. Like in this case, in constructor, we are injecting a complete class with the name my service. So my service is a class which is being injected into this into the constructor of this example component. So here we are writing @inject. It is telling that this parameter will be injected based on some other thing. So we can inject a class, we can inject some variable, or we can inject some other thing. So parameters of a class or a function can be injected using @inject in @inject. These are parameter level decorator. So we can decorate the information at different level. @ is actually defines that it is a decorator. Then we have a data binding. Before starting the data binding, let me tell you a JavaScript way out. It is double curly braces. It is actually interpolation. We say it interpolation, but before that we say in JavaScript we say it expression. Whatever written in this double curly braces, it will be executed, and the result of this execution will be provided as an output. Just like this, 1 plus 1 will be calculated first. It will return the 2 wherever it will be assigned. Same here, this value will be converted into a date, and the date will be returned to wherever it is required. The same user.name is a variable, and the output of this will be the value of this user.name. So these are all the expressions. Same expression technique is used in Angular also. In Angular we provide double curly braces. It is actually interpolation. It calculates whatever written into it and provides the output. Just like this, if we say the input type is equal to text, value is equal to double curly braces message, the message itself is a variable, and when in the TS file we have declared this variable, we would have declared that variable, and this variable will be replaced with the actual value of that variable. So this is the way out with in which we can provide one-way data binding from our model TS file to our view to the HTML file. That means we are providing a value from our TS file to our HTML file. That is one way data binding, and that can be using interpolation. The other way, one way data binding is actually providing the value in shape of let me show you. This is one way, this is interpolation, and the other way is I'm providing the value as a target property here and the value here. This is one way. This is one way of data binding. This is also one way of data binding. In it we write the property in square brackets and the value or the variable in double quotes. So in this way we provides a one-way data binding. The effect of this and this will be the same. We like in this case, if we provide the square brackets against value, and we will remove these curly braces against message, then it will also be a single one-way data binding, have the same effect. So we can use either this way out or this way out. Both have. Alternatively, one-way data binding, we are providing the value from our model, the TS file, to our HTML file, our view. So this is actually one-way data binding. Angular also supports a two-way data binding. In it, whatever is written into your form in your view is available in your TS file automatically, and whatever is written in your model is alternatively available in your view or form. So you don't need to send information here or there. Automatically it is being binded with the variable. So that process is called a two-way data binding, and it is normally done in the shape of forms. Whenever a form field is binded with a variable in TS file, that binding is normally a two-way data binding. To provide that two-way data binding, what we do, we provide the field with ng model, uh, two braces, and then the variable with which we are binding. This variable will be declared in our TS file, and that variable will basically available in TS, and whenever we write whatever in the field, like in form input field we write Rashid, that Rashid is alternatively available as a value of this component property. So that is a two-way data binding. We write here in the view, we will get it in the model. If we write in the model, update any value in the model, it will alternatively available in the view with the live keystrokes. So this is a strong way out to get the information from view to model and model to view. This is two-way data binding. We will see an example in our coding part also. So it is very strong way out of Angular to get information from model to view or view to model. This is again a property binding. This is one way data binding. Here we are binding a property with a variable, so that is also a one-way data binding. Just in case image, the source is encapsulated into a square brackets, and this is the variable which will be provided in from our TS file. The value of this image will be changed at runtime, and accordingly the source of this image will be changed at runtime. So this is a way of one-way data binding. Next, what we will see the event binding. We can bind the event also. In HTML we will bind the event, and in TS file we will write the relevant event. Like in HTML, what we will do, button, we will do a click function, and against that we are writing our method which will be called. This method on save will be declared in our TS file, component TS file, and to execute that function, what we are doing is binding the click. We are putting the braces against this click, and whenever this click, there will be click on this button, on save method will be called. That is actually declared in our TS file. So this is the way with which we bind an event. It can be a double click, it can be a single click, or whatever it is. So we provide this type of event binding in Angular using these braces. You can see here we are calling a function on delete request. This is basically one of the method binding also. We can also do attribute binding. We can define a specific attribute based on some value. Same, we can define we can bind the classes, that if this, then this class will be executed, else this class will be executed, or we can do directly the class dot special and is special, and this, the value of this will be provided using our TS file. It can be changed at runtime, and this is the example which I am talking about. Style.color is special. The value of color is defined on the basis of this variable. If this variable is either red is true, then the value will be red and the color will be red, else it will be green. So we are binding the style of any component based on some variable. So this is also a way of data binding. So these are all the data bindings which we will apply in our code also. Then our concept is of routing. In routing part, we have two things in our routing part. One is basically our the routing component or a routing module which we have already in our application. In that module, we have an important array, that is of routes. In that route we define that against that specific route this component will be called. Like I'm saying, when the user will click the search, the component will be called as search component. If the path is about, the component will be loaded is about. If it is a default empty path, the home component will be loaded. So this is what basically the first part of our routing application. We have to define all the routes in our routes array in our routing module.ts file. We will define all the routes in routing module.ts file. Then on the other end, we will define the router outlet from where we will click. By default, if we place anchor tag will reload the page. In Angular, we don't reload the page. To avoid this thing, what we will do use actually the router link and the name of the path. This is the same as we defined here. The search, we will define here search, router link search. Whenever the user will click on this search, it will actually will not reload the we reload the view, but it will load the component only, the relevant component into our view. So this is the way out with which we can provide the routing. We need two part. One is actually the navigation links. We are defining our navigation link, for example, in the header.html file, header component file. We define all our routing part, and against those links which we define, we have to write our components, like against in our routing module.ts file, that against this specific path, this component will be loaded. Against this specific path, this component will be loaded. Against this specific path, this component will be loaded. So this is the way out with which we provide a routing, and this router outlet is actually the component which is providing the routing about all these routing. We will implement it and it will be very easy for you to understand. The last thing is Bootstrap and jQuery. To include Bootstrap and jQuery, you have to install Bootstrap or jQuery into your project. You can provide the live CDN links also in your index.html file, or you can just install it using npm. Go to your relevant project folder and install Bootstrap and jQuery. It will be installed into your node modules. Then the next part is to write that links into your index.html. In that part, you have to write dot dot, means you have to go back one folder, and then node modules, Bootstrap, this css Bootstrap, your css file, and this is basically index.html, the only file which is our main loading file. So we will provide the link in that file, and then we provide the JavaScript file link, jQuery and Bootstrap at the end of that body. So this is the way out with which we provide the Bootstrap to all the application. Now Bootstrap will be available in our project, and we can add any Bootstrap component, just like Jumbotron or accordions or anything else. We can do it in our project without worrying about any other activity. So the Bootstrap has been added into our code, and it can be utilized. That is all from the theoretical part. Now in the second part, we will implement these concepts one by one. We will see how to create a component, how to add the component into our module. We will use the routing, we will use the binding part, and we will see the templates, how to write code into templates. We will use the Bootstrap to include that needs to be included, and we will create the header and footer in our next part. Thank you for listening. We will meet in next part.